You're watching Bookmarks with Jason, and on this channel, I talk about book collecting and my reading experiences. 2024 was a rough year. I went through a lot of personal challenges, which made it very difficult for me to find time to post as much content as I'd like to. I also ended the year with the number 19 in Stephen King terms. I also began the new year still having a number 19, which I hope is not a sign of another chaotic year ahead. But despite all that, I still managed to read a total of 51 books, which is not bad considering the limited amount of time I had to actually read. And out of those 51, I'd like to talk about my top 5 reads,
the cream of the crop,
of 2024. Some of my best reads of the year happened around spooky season, and at number 5, NOS 4A2, which is a play on a vampire film Nosferatu, is a good example of that. This was my first experience reading Joe Hill, and I was beyond impressed. Much of his father's horror writing DNA is on full display here. Nosferatu has all the elements you love about classic Stephen King: the coming-of-age aspect, a supernatural villain, great character work, sprinkled with some dark fantasy. I love my seasonal reads, but I wish I would have read this around December because this is pretty much a Christmas-themed horror story. Nosferatu gave me strong It vibes, because we see children being abducted by a villain who is just as sinister as Pennywise. Only this time around, we don't have a team of children trying to take him down. There's also a few Easter eggs here that tie into Stephen King's multiverse. It's no secret that Joe Hill inherited his famous dad's creative genes, yet he still managed to establish a strong career outside of his shadow while continuing to wear his dad's influence on his sleeve. If Stephen King is the king of his multiverse, then Joe Hill is a prince of that sandbox. At number 4, I have A Hero Born by Jin Young. While Jin Young may not be a well-known name in America, he was one of the most iconic novelists of the wuxia genre in China. Wuxia is basically martial arts fantasy mixed in with historical fiction. The most well-known representation of wuxia in popular culture are in some of the Shaw Brothers martial arts films and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. A Hero Born is the first translated volume in a 4-book series called The Legend of the Condor Heroes. The story is set in Imperial China, where we see various clans and dynasties go at it. I wasn't sure if I would enjoy this book, being that I prefer to watch martial arts action over reading it. But Jin Young did an excellent job writing the action sequences where I could picture them vividly. His character work was also top-notch. I love this book so much that I went ahead and read the second book entitled A Bond Undone, which was just as good, if not better, than A Hero Born. There's a beloved character introduced in Hero Born that takes center stage in Book 2. In 2024, I read 2 Dune novels, the first being Children of Dune, and the second was God Emperor of Dune, which takes the number 3 spot on this list. I enjoyed God Emperor of Dune far more than Children of Dune, which is strange because out of the first 4 books, God Emperor was the least eventful story-wise. There is not even a clear antagonist or protagonist. Without spoilers, the story takes place about 9,000 years in the future, so most of the characters we are familiar with are long gone and now legend. At its core, it's a story of a man who gives up his humanity to become a self-proclaimed God Emperor of Dune. While light on plot, Frank Herbert puts a heavier emphasis on philosophical themes and the psychology of a dictator. I really enjoyed this installment of Dune, which many fans feel like is the peak of the series. At number 2, I have Memorials by Richard Chizmar. If you're not familiar with his work, he is a colleague of Stephen King and helped co-write the Button Box trilogy. Memorials takes place in 1983, where 3 college students go on a week-long trip to document and research roadside memorials deep in the Appalachian backwoods. Along the way, they encounter many frightening and disturbing events. Are these supernatural forces at play, or the work of some sinister cult? As they go deeper down the rabbit hole, their lives are changed forever. I love reading horror stories, and Memorials is the first one that actually scared me, which is saying a lot because I read both Pet Sematary and The Stand in 2024. Yet somehow this book caught me by surprise and made my top 5. That's no shade to those Stephen King masterpieces, but this book had a stronger impact on me personally. Memorials gave me strong Blair Witch vibes, but with far more likable and endearing characters that are easy to root for. It's the character work that struck a chord with me and made me fear for their well-being. If you have not read anything by Richard Chizmar, this would be a good starting point. The book was also just released in October of 2024, so you can easily find a first edition hardcover at your local bookstore. I went ahead and read King and Chizmar's Gwendy's Button Box shortly after, and that was an excellent read as well. Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett tells the tale of a stonemason who joins forces with a prior to build a cathedral in 12th century England. Why would I read this, and how could the most boring sounding book take the number 1 spot in my top 5? Well, simply put, it's undeniably one of the best books I have ever read, no joke. The first chapter alone immediately sets the tone of this high-stakes 900-plus page epic that never lets up. So what makes this book so fantastic? Well, from my experience, I believe it's a book that can be enjoyed on many different levels, no matter what your genre of preference is. As an action-adventure, it's intense, gritty, and violent, with well-written action set pieces. As a work of historical fiction, Ken Follett nails down the time period to the tiniest of details, while adding some historical figures and events to the backdrop of the story. You can tell that he thoroughly did his research for the time period, and you'll want to do the same after finishing the novel. As a suspense thriller, you will be at the edge of your seat from start to finish. Prior to this book, Ken Follett was well known for his spy thrillers, and you can see that he put that same level of craft for this story. As an erotic romance, I wasn't expecting to see any explicit scenes here, but that it did have. And if that's your sort of thing, then you won't be disappointed. I'm not complaining. Fantasy fans will also find plenty to enjoy here. While technically not a fantasy novel, it's pretty much sword minus the sorcery. It has some of the most vilest villains I've read on page, along with some of the noblest of heroes, mixed in with a high level of political intrigue and some of the most epic battles I've ever experienced. Had this book been written as a fantasy novel, it would easily be my favorite fantasy work of all time. I haven't even touched upon Ken Follett's writing. His prose is sophisticated enough to match the time period, while being accessible for general readers to not have to reach out for a dictionary. He strikes the perfect balance without having to dumb anything down. There was not a single dull moment in this novel, nor any weaknesses I could point out. It's pillars of perfection. Pillars of the Earth is also the first in a 5-volume Kingsbridge series. From what I've heard, the other 4 novels are just as good. Oh yeah, they also made a video game adaptation available on all major consoles. Yep, a video game about building a cathedral. Need I say more? If you haven't read Pillars of the Earth, please make it a priority in 2025. And that's all I have for today. Please hit that like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next page. Happy New Year!